Mandalorians, a proud culture with warrior traditions stretching back thousands of years, well before the establishment of the Galactic Republic, 25,000 years before the events of Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. When reading novels like the Republic Commando series, as well as the Legacy of the Force series that delve deep into the Mandalorian culture and language, it's easy to forget that this is a fictional culture. That being said, what makes it seem so real, so believable? Were there ever any cultures like the Mandalorians that existed in our history? While British author Karen Travis, the architect of the Mandalorian language and culture within the Star Wars expanded universe, stated that the Mandalorians are based on the ancient Celts, I, however, can't help but notice striking similarities between them and multiple other warrior cultures from history, chief among them, and first we'll explore, the Spartans. Sparta was a Bronze Age city-state, hailing from southern mainland Greece, and was one of the most powerful of these city-states, second only at times to its neighboring rival, Athens. To say that Spartan society and culture was rough would be an understatement. From the moment a Spartan was born, he or she was judged by the city elders, and if any imperfection was found, the child would be discarded at the foot of the Apothetai, a large hill a few miles outside of Sparta, where the baby would lie exposed to the elements. Sometimes you were abandoned just for simply being a girl, if more male children were desired for the military. Yet women in Spartan culture were by no means weaker than their male counterparts. They were taught to hold their own as well. When it came to be time for a male Spartan to choose a bride, he would often forcibly take one. If the woman to be desired fancied her suitor, she would allow him to take her. If not, she would have to fend him off, and if she was successful, she remained open and ready for any newcomers. Spartan boys began their military training at the tender age of 7, often beaten and pitted against one another in a training system known as the agoge, until the time they became adults, which was not until they murdered their first helot, or slave. The trick to passing this test of manhood was not simply the act of killing the helot, but not getting caught while doing so, for if he was, he would be punished severely. The Spartan idea of democracy was that no one man should embody all of the power, so naturally their solution was to have 2 kings from 2 royal houses, one house believed to be descended from the Greek myth Heracles himself. Though the Spartan's preferred style of combat was in a unit or phalanx, he was perfectly capable of holding his own, being trained in a brutal form of martial arts known as pankration, a no-holds-barred style of wrestling, where eye-gouging, biting, and choking were the norms. So fierce were the Spartans at pankration that they were barred from participating in the Olympic version of the sport. However, more often than not, on the battlefield, the Spartan would fight in a phalanx, a tight grouping of soldiers, each man's shield protecting the man to his left, while his spear was open for thrusting, and at times the phalanx could stretch for miles along the battlefield. Typical battlefield equipment for the Spartans consisted of a large bronze hopalon shield, a long spear, a short sword known as a kopis, bronze greaves, vambraces on their arms, a bronze cuirass for torso protection, and lastly, the iconic Corinthian helmet, sometimes adorned with horsehair crest to denote officer's rank. Visually and aesthetically, one can already see the physical resemblance between Star Wars' Mandalorians and our Spartans, just by taking a quick glance at their battlefield equipment. The Mandalorian helmet, or boucher, with its iconic T-shaped visor, is distinctly similar to the Spartans' Corinthian helmet. Narrow eye slits, long extended open space where your mouth would go, and just the overall conical shape of the boucher harkens back to the ancient Corinthian helmets of old. Even the torso plates of the Mandalorian's armor, or Beskar-gam, almost look like pectorals, reminiscent of the Spartan cuirass, which was often decorated to look like a man's chest, complete with pectoral and abdominal muscles cast in shining bronze. Mandalorians often customize their armor with colorful designs, emblems, and symbols, and each color has a different meaning. Red usually symbolizes honoring a loved one, gray signifies mourning a loss, black is for justice, gold is for vengeance, blue equals reliability, green signifies duty, and orange is a lust for life. The Spartans did something similar with their equipment, as they often customized their Hopalon shields with intricate designs, usually symbols to signify unit or faction loyalty, and animals to intimidate the enemy. There's one story of a Spartan warrior who had a life-sized fly painted on his Hopalon, and when asked about it, he would say that he would get so close to the enemy that fly would look like a lion. Unlike the Spartans, however, the Mandalorians' equipment was based on their personal preferences, rather than standard issue, as there are a multitude of different blasters and weapons available to them in the Star Wars universe, not to mention the different gadgets often integrated into their vambraces such as wrist rockets, slide-out vibro blades, and flame projectors make them weapons in their own right. One common weapon that the Mandalorians do share with the Spartans is a traditional short sword called a Beskad. Like the Spartan Kopis, the Mandalorian Beskad is a short sword primarily for thrusting and slashing when the combat gets a little too close quarters, and although it was more common among the ancient Mandalorian Crusaders, many modern-era Mandalorians continue to carry the Beskad into battle. Mandalorian children began their training a little younger than Spartan children, and are taught by their mother until the age of 8 when they go off to train with their fathers, and unlike Spartan children, both male and females are trained in the art of combat, as well as basic survival. By 13, Mandalorian children also face a rite of passage, called the Verdgoten, though this doesn't involve killing a slave and eluding the blame for it. No, the Verdgoten is a test of all the skills that the youth had learned up to this point in their life, and was more akin to a hunting trip than an assassination, as is common in most tribal cultures in our history. Though ideally performed alone, it was just as acceptable to have a parent, usually the father, accompany the youth on his or her Verdgoten, and it remained just as legitimate. After the completion of the Verdgoten, the youth was legally an adult in Mandalorian society, and would enjoy his or her first toast soon after. The typical Mandalorian family unit is anything but, as the idea of sharing genetic material making one related to you is a concept that the Mandalorians disregard completely. An old Mandalorian adage states, Alit Orishia Taldin, family is more than blood. And while Mandalorian couples did reproduce naturally, it wasn't uncommon for children to be adopted by the rite of Gai Bal Manda, which gives no restrictions on age. There are examples of full-fledged adults being adopted by this practice, and it was just as common to adopt people as your siblings as well. The warrior you fought beside and bled with, you can name your brother or sister, your Vod, and your Vode were as your real brothers and sisters. You open your home to them, and share meals with them, just as you would your biological siblings. In my research, I've had trouble finding ancient warrior cultures that did exactly this, as it appears to be more of a modern concept. However, I found that the Irish Celts did something similar to this with their clan system, rather than individual families, where outsiders to the clan can be adopted into the clan by decree of the clan chief, after conferring with the clan assembly. Marriage between Mandalorians was done in a similar way to adoption. Instead of a big lavish ceremony, a few short phrases were uttered and behold, you're married, and divorce was carried out in the same fashion, where you just unname your spouse. Same-sex marriages between Mandalorians were considered just as legitimate as traditional marriages, and although we only have one example of a same-sex Mandalorian marriage in the books, we're told it's fairly common. Homosexuality in ancient Sparta was not only common but encouraged at times. However, the institution of marriage was strictly between a man and a woman, as the family unit in ancient Sparta was considered a unit of production by the state. It was to produce soldiers for the military, unlike the Mandalorians, who don't possess a state, as I will soon explain. Mandalorians are semi-nomadic, always prepared to get up and move their entire lives at a moment's notice, and are not limited to Manda-LORE as there are thousands of scattered Mandalorian clans across the galaxy, contrary to their Spartan comparison. In this sense, the Mandalorians are more akin to the Mongols than the Spartans or the Celts. On Manda-LORE, the homeworld of the Mandalorians, there are a few speckled permanent settlements, the chief of which is Keldabe, Mandalore's capital, making it kind of a city-state like Sparta, wherein there's only one main city and a couple dozen scattered villages. Mandalorians don't really have what can be considered a central government. Instead, the Mandalorian people are grouped into clans, which for the most part govern themselves and look after one another, and this is where the Celtic influences mentioned earlier come into play. The closest thing the Mandalorians have to a king, so to say, is the Manda-LORE, Grand Chieftain of the Mandalorians, who, in the past, was more like a king and held sway over the Mandalorian clans, declaring crusades and leading the Mandalorians in glorious battle against their foes. The position of the Manda-LORE has changed dramatically since the days of the Mandalorian Crusaders during the Old Republic era, and has since become more of a constitutional monarch and figurehead than absolute monarch in the later years of the Star Wars timeline. Modern-era Mandalores are usually respected individuals who are unanimously offered up and chosen to serve as the Manda-LORE, rather than inheriting or taking the position from the previous Manda-LORE. Instead of enacting edicts and decrees, later Mandalores were more involved in instilling a sense of unity among the Mandalorians, and mitigating disagreements between clans, though he or she still maintained the power to call the warriors of the Mandalorian clans to their side in times of war. As Mandalore Boba Fett once put it,
"You can't rule Mandalorians, you just make sensible suggestions they want to follow."
This overall clan system, where the Mandalorian clans are the main socio-political system answering to a high chief, is consistent with both the Irish Celtic and Scottish Celtic clan systems. I find that the Mandalorian clan system more resembles the Irish Celtic clan system, as the High King of Ireland, which was largely a symbolic title like the Manda-LORE, was rotated among the chiefs of the clans rather than inherited, though this changed in the latter years of Ireland's monarchy. The Scottish clan system was similar, though the King of Scotland was a hereditary title and maintained absolute power. Lastly, the Mandalorian language, or Mandoa, from a lore perspective, is contrived of many different alien languages from those that the ancient Mandalorian Crusaders had conquered and subjugated. Therefore, it makes sense as to why I couldn't find one singular, real-world linguistic influence for Mandoa. I've pawed through the appendices of the Republic Commando novels, browsed a couple of online resources for learning Mandoa, and even resorted to looking at the behind-the-scenes section of the Mandoa Wikipedia article, and I found nothing on the etymology of Mandoa. I am no linguist, as much as I appreciate languages, accents, and being able to imitate accents. I only have about 2 years of high school level German under my belt, so when I say that I'm extrapolating, I'm really extrapolating, given my limited knowledge. From a cursory glance, Mandoa seems to be derived from a hodgepodge of different Romantic languages, that is, languages based in Latin, like French, Spanish, and Italian, with a slight tinge of German and a Slavic twist. Mandoa word structure, such as the addition of suffixes at the end of nouns to emphasize affection, is a common trait among Romantic languages like Spanish. Meanwhile, the pronunciation of Mandoa words is seemingly Slavic in origin, given the harsh guttural sounds the words form. In fact, when I first read the Republic Commando novels when I was younger, the sound of the words reminded me of my childhood neighbor, when he talked to his family in his native Serbian. So, I've always personally associated Mandoa with Slavic languages. However, I must reiterate, I am no linguist, so this is merely my interpretation. I'm sure others more educated than I have a better understanding of where Mandoa actually comes from. Unfortunately, upon leaving the Star Wars franchise, Karen Traviss deleted a lot of her blogs going in depth on Mandoa, so, short of contacting her and asking myself, which I considered doing but my anxiety got the better of me, we'll never know the linguistic influences that Mrs. Traviss had in her mind specifically when she developed Mandoa. To sum it all up, Mandalorians are the quintessential warrior culture in the Star Wars Legends continuity. Therefore, it makes sense that we see influences from multiple warrior cultures in real life in the Mandalorians, not just one specific one in particular. I hope you've enjoyed this new series of mine, and if you have any suggestions of other parallels between the Star Wars Expanded Universe and real-world history, let me know in the comments, and if you liked this video, click like and subscribe. If you want to learn more about the Mandalorians, check out my in-universe lore videos, linked here and in the description. Until next time, I've been Tad Larkin, and you're watching Manda-LORE.